Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Going Off Track podcast. I am Catherine, and this is episode 22 of our F101 Spring Break Sprint, where, in case you've missed it, I am going through old F1 lore and F1 history from before I became an F1 fan back in the 2021 season, helping to educate other Drive to Survive era Formula One fans about the sport. You can check out the full playlist, which is linked above. And yesterday, I covered Michael Schumacher's F1 debut and the, let's call it, unique circumstances surrounding it and how he ended up staying on the grid for the rest of that season. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss a video in this series and all season long, and so I can continue to inflict my motorsport opinions upon the greater population. And if you're listening on your preferred podcast platform, please don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. I know in the end of yesterday's episode, I said that we were going to be talking about liveries that I liked all time, but I decided to change up the schedule because I do what I want, and we're going to talk about this instead. And what we are talking about today is how John Watson set the record for winning from furthest back on the grid. Now, we've seen a lot of that in recent years. We've talked about, Max Verstappen's wild charges from the far end of the grid, but this is the record for the win from the furthest back on the grid, and it happened at the 1983 United States Grand Prix West. I don't know why it was called the West United States Grand Prix when the other United States Grand Prix that year was in Detroit, and they didn't call it East, but it was probably to differentiate between the two. And this was officially known as the Toyota Grand Prix of Long Beach. And now the Long Beach Grand Prix is a major event in the IndyCar series. And this was actually the last time that Formula One raced in Long Beach as part of the Long Beach GP since it moved over and now is part of the IndyCar schedule. John Watson was driving for McLaren that season alongside his teammate Niki Lauda, who's kind of the more well-known driver of the two. And they both qualified terribly. Now, the available drivers to qualify, there were 28 of them, though only 26 actually went through to race day. But Watson qualified 22nd and Lauda qualified 23. Lauda would go on to win his last career World Drivers' Championship in the following season in 1984. And this was not necessarily a sign of things to come for the season. This was actually pretty early on in the year, but this was back when we had tire wars. Now, we talked about tire wars in the 2005 United States Grand Prix episode that we did ways back. That's linked up top and down in the show notes. And basically, you had to commit to a set of tires from a tire supplier at the beginning of the season. And if a tire was not good at a certain track, you were just kind of SOL. And so the Michelin tires that McLaren was using at the time were just not very good and contributed to some really slow quality times. And that was the big shock, was that they were qualified so far back down the grid where nobody really expected them to do anything, except by the time they got to lap 25 of 75 laps, Lauda was up in P3 and Watson was up in P4. So clearly they had managed to figure things out with those tire issues going into the race. And there were also a number of retirements during the race while they were making their charge through. And remember, these are back in the days of refueling alongside your pit stops. I watched the highlights of this race on F1 TV. They had an hour-long highlight package instead of the full race replay, which they didn't have for all of the races back in the 80s. But it kept popping up and it kept showing like, oh, we're moving through, and those drivers were trucking on their way to the podium contention. And by the time the race ended, actually, every driver had been lapped except for the 3 podium drivers. Also, listening to the broadcast, it was kind of funny talking about what Lauda and Watson were doing. It was really more so Watson, apparently, like the gossip said that Watson was only on a race-to-race contract and that he might have been on the verge of being replaced by another driver, Alan Jones, who had been coming back. I think he had been injured and he was coming back to Formula One from that. Now, Watson would go on to finish the season with McLaren, though he left the grid in 1984. And I think he made one more appearance with McLaren in 1985, because I was, back in the day where you can just kind of hop in and hop out of the grid, willy-nilly. But the talk about that was really about Watson proving that he was just as capable, if that, compared to Lauda, who is obviously, Niki freaking Lauda. But Watson did overtake Niki Lauda on lap 32 for P3 and then ultimately took the lead of the race on lap 45. Lauda was dealing with cramping issues and just couldn't get back at Watson. And this ended up being Watson's 5th and final career victory. So it was quite the show that they put on making that charge. Watson would also go on to podium at the other United States race that year, that one in Detroit. He would finish P3. And now that we are actually back to 22 drivers on the grid, this record is technically breakable now. For a while, it wasn't, because we only had 20 drivers on the grid, so you could only win from 20th. But now that we've got our friends at Cadillac, we've got 2 more cars, so that's 22. Max Verstappen is the current active driver with the biggest win from furthest back on the grid. Obviously, that's the Sao Paulo race in 2024, winning from P17. And that is tied with John Watson in 1982 in Detroit and Kimi Räikkönen in Suzuka in 2005. Now, Bill Vukovic, his comeback is actually the second biggest comeback. He started from P19 to win the race, but there's a little asterisk technicality on that, because he did that at the Indy 500, which was technically an F1 race, but is not an F1 style race, if you know what I mean, if you remember that episode on talking about winning on debut. So there's that technicality there. And then the third biggest win from furthest back on the grid is Rubens Barrichello, who actually won from P18 on the grid at the 2000 German Grand Prix. Watson would go on to become an F1 commentator for a number of years and a number of different platforms, while European media were trying to figure out how to best showcase Formula One to a broader audience. And then the audience continued to grow, and now is currently providing GT racing commentary. So he's still at it. I think he's like in his late 70s now. And when you think about it, Long Beach was actually one of 12 different circuits that Formula One has used in the United States, which is the most different circuits in the same country, leagues ahead of the second most, which is France with 7. And I believe Spain will also come in for a tie with 7 this year when we go to the Madrid circuit, because F1 has raced in Madrid before, but the circuit that they're going to be using this season on the Mad Ring, I believe, is going to be considered a new circuit. It should be. So that'll be 7. But yeah, it is wild to think of all of the different locations that F1 has raced at in the United States. And we're going to talk about that in a couple of episodes, and one of the specific of those locations for, let's call it, reasons. So make sure that you tune in for, I think that episode's going to come out on the 24th. But before that, we have the episode that's coming out on the 23rd, which is tomorrow, which is how the Formula One season finale in 2014 kind of got a little weird and kind of broke Formula One a little bit. But we'll talk about why in the next episode. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for going off track with me, and I will see you tomorrow.